Hey, the cookies that I'm decorating are the full-size cookies that come in the big box, but you do the exact same thing for the minis, so I hope you enjoy. Let's get ready and decorate our fun corn cookie first. Here we are going to take our yellow piping icing, and I'm just going around where the actual corn cob would be. And you'll notice that I just sketched some little lines on here to help me know where to place the different colors of icing. I used an edible marker and I just looked at the clip art. Next, after I outlined with the yellow piping, I'm just filling it in with my yellow flood. Make sure that you put enough flood icing because that will get your corn cob to look really good and smooth. Now I'm just moving the icing around to get it where I want it to be. And then I'm going to let that crust over. Next, I'm taking my green piping icing. And here I'm using tip number 1.5. I'm doing a little squiggle there in the middle so that I do not have cratering. And then I put my green flood right on top of it. Now I use a tip because I'm going to use a tip with my piping icing in a minute. So I didn't want to have two bags. Next, I'm just going around that outside, if you look at the clip art, with my piping icing again, the outside of the corn. Next, I'm going to take my flood icing and I'm just going to fill that area in with the flood icing. And then I'm just going to repeat it on the other side of the corn. And before I did these sides, I let the bottom just crust over so that they didn't all blend in together. I wanted that little bottom piece to be separate. Next, I'm going to allow this to crust over. Then I'm going to take my tip number 104 with my piping icing, and I'm holding the bottom of the tip, the fat part, against the cookie and angling it about 45 degrees. The skinny part is at the top, and I just squeeze and pull down, and that creates a little bit of some 3 dimension on my corn. And again, I did that with piping icing. So you want to make sure that your piping icing is thick enough so that that little area will kind of stand up a little bit. Next, I am using my autumn gold, and this is a 20-second icing, so I can use it for piping and flooding. And I'm just haphazardly putting some little kernels, and you can add as many as you want, and that cookie is finished. You can leave it like this, or you'll notice in the picture, I actually added a few more kernels, but I sort of liked it better like this. Now let's do the beer. So the first thing that I did is I used an edible marker and I drew those rectangles. They're just long rectangles, one in the center and one on either side. And I'm using my autumn gold 20-second icing to go around the triangles. And you'll notice they start at the bottom of where the foam will be, and they end right above where that base is going to be. So again, I'm just looking at the clip art. This line's going to be completely covered. Then I'm going to take that same 20-second icing and I'm going to fill in these little channels going around the rectangles. I like to do the outside area first and then do the inside with the brighter yellow. I think it's easier. Now, if you did this with flood icing, you probably would have craters. So I would recommend a thicker flood or, again, like a 20-second icing. Next, we're going to take our yellow flood icing, and you don't have to let this area dry. You can go ahead and do it right away. And you're just going to squeeze your yellow flood icing into those channels. Now, I noticed that this channel didn't have quite enough icing, so I'm just adding a little bit of flood. Because I just did this, it wasn't dry, it was fine. So now I allowed it to dry. At least you want this to be dry at least 2 hours, maybe even 3, because you don't want to mess up what you just did. And I'm taking my white piping icing and I'm just going around the bottom and going around where the handle would be. And you'll notice I'm doing this little line of icing with the piping icing because that will prevent flooding. And I'm going to make a mistake here in a second, and then I'm going to show you how easy it is to fix it, because I'm going to overfill this bottom section with flood icing. And then I'm going to show you how easy it is to correct that with the scribe. So that's way too much, which is no big deal, except it's going to overflow on the bottom. So I'm just going to hold the cookie and I'm going to hold my scribe straight up and down. And then I'm just going to scrape that icing away. Now, you have to let your icing, if it's too thin, it'll just continue to run over. So you might need to let it dry for a minute before you do that. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this section. I'm just going to go over top of it with the white flood icing. Then the next part is really the fun part. I'm going to take my white piping icing and I'm just going to squeeze it all along the top. So with the white, you want to make sure that your piping icing is thick enough that it will have structure when you pipe it. Meaning you don't want it to just, go together. You don't want it to be a 20-second icing because then it won't look like foam. So you want to make sure that it's a little bit thicker than what you would normally use for piping icing. And you just squeeze it on so it looks like foam. And then this cookie's done. This is such a cute cookie, and it really is not difficult. In fact, you wouldn't even have to put those channels in the bottom. You could just do the bottom in solid autumn gold if you wanted to, and it would still be super cute. So next, let's do our ice cream cone. Now here, I forgot to film it, so I just took my brown and I went along the edge, and then I made those 3 little smiley faces you can see at the top of the cone, and then I filled that in with the brown flood. And then I let this dry completely, or well, you don't have to let it dry completely till it's crusted over pretty well because you don't want to mess it up. So I'd say at least an hour. Then I'm going to take my piping icing and I'm just creating this crosshatch pattern. If you don't let your icing dry enough, you could risk, messing it up as you're doing this. Or if it's too wet, these lines will just sink in. So you really want to make sure that it's pretty good and crusted over and dry. And there's no rhyme or reason to these. You just want to go diagonally and make a cross hatch. Next, you're going to take your white piping icing and you're going to go all the way around the edge of the ice cream. And then you're going to fill it in with your white flood. And when I flood, you'll notice I like starting at the edge and squeezing, putting more pressure on the bag and then going into the center. And then I'm just using my scribe to wiggle that in place. And again, make sure that you have enough icing on your cookie. Now, I'm going to let this dry again. You really want to make sure that this is good and dry. Then I'm going to use my thicker white icing that I used a minute ago for the beer. And I'm just going to squeeze individual circles of icing out at the bottom of the cone. And that's what gives it dimension and makes it really look like an ice cream cone. I think that's so cute. Again, you want to make sure that your icing is thick enough. If it's not thick enough, you can take it out of the bag and add some sifted powdered sugar to make it a little bit thicker. You always want to use sifted powdered sugar, otherwise you'll get clumps. Now for our chocolate, we're using our darker brown 20-second icing. And I'm just kind of doing this haphazardly to look like there's dripping chocolate. And once I outline it, I'm just going to fill it. You could use piping and flooding for this, but since we only use a little bit of dark brown, I decided to just use, the 20-second icing, which you can use for both. And then just move it around to make sure that I have it at the edge of the ice cream. And this cookie's done. You could add sprinkles too, which would be super cute if you want to. Now let's do our fun hot dog cookie. Now again, I used an edible marker to draw where the hot dog was going to go and where the bun starts and ends. And I'm just going around the bun. And I'm going to show you all how to airbrush this. And the reason I wanted to do that is the dark brown that we use is really too dark brown for the hot dog. Unless you want a burnt hot dog, you could certainly use that if you want. But I want to show you how you can use one color and use airbrush. And it just keeps you from having to create a lot of different colors of icing. So I went around where the bun was with my piping icing, and then I'm going to fill it on both sides with the flood. And then I'm going to allow it to dry at least an hour before I start airbrushing. So now my hot dog bun is done. And I'm going to take Harvest Brown and put it in the airbrush machine. And the Harvest Brown airbrush color is from Chef Master. And I'm just going to spray the edge of my bun. I don't do a great job here, and really I create a darker brown on my entire bun, which is completely fine. Then I'm using the exact same color that I used for the bun, and I'm filling in the hot dog. So see, you don't have to have two different colors. Now, when I did spray, I tried to just spray on the edge, and there is kind of a gradation, is that the right word, of color. It's definitely darker along the edge and then lighter in the center. That was my goal. So I'm just going to fill this in, and then I'm going to allow it to crust over, And then I'm going to use my Autumn Gold 20-second icing to do the little squiggle of mustard on top. And then that cookie's done. Let's make the hamburger. This is my favorite cookie of the bunch. So we're taking that same light brown that we just used for the hot dog, and I'm taking the piping icing and I'm going around where the bun is. And you will notice that I use an edible marker again, and I just drew around the different sections. And you can tell where they are if you compare the clip art to the cookie cutter. So I'm just filling in the bun, and I'm going to do the top bun and the bottom bun. And then I'm going to do exactly what we did a moment ago with the hot dog, and I'm going to airbrush it with the Chef Master Brown. I love the Harvest Brown from Chef Master. It really makes it look like it has kind of a cooked edge. I just really like the way it looks on the hot dog and the hamburger buns. So again, I'm going to let this dry so it's really good and crusted over. And then you can tell I'm using the same paper towel that I used before with the hot dog. And I'm just going around the edges. With this, because it's a larger area, you can see where there's still, the lighter brown remaining in the center. Next, I'm going to take my dark brown 20-second icing, and I'm going around where the hamburger is. And this is so much fun to do here in a minute. I'm going to let this dry for about 30 minutes. You don't want it to be too dry. So I would say between 15 and 30 minutes, depending on how, where you live. And I'll show you what it's supposed to do. Now, you are just taking your scribe and you're going to poke holes in it. If those kind of bleed back together, you need to let it dry a little bit more. If the holes are really hard to break, you've let it dry too long. Or, if it's hard to break the icing. So between 15 and 30 minutes is perfect. I would start at 15, and if it just all kind of starts to blend back together, let it dry 15 more minutes. Now let's grab our Autumn Gold 20-second icing, and we're going to use that for our piece of cheese. So since it's 20-second icing, you can use it both for piping and flooding. So I'm just outlining, and then I'm going to fill it in. Now let's go ahead and use our tip number 104 again. And so the wide part of the tip is on the bottom. I have it at about a 45-degree angle. And the skinny part of the tip, sort of like the top of the rainbow, is at the top. And I'm just squeezing and moving my tip up and down, and it creates sort of a ruffled effect, which I think is super cute for lettuce. Now we need some sesame seeds on top of our bun. So here I'm just taking white piping icing and I squeeze out a dot of icing, and then I stop squeezing and move my piping bag up. I'm kind of creating a rainbow. So there's a squeeze and then move it up. Squeeze, move it up. Let's use the mini cookie cutter to create this cute, cute gift. You're going to take your piping icing and you're going to go along the edge. And then you're going to fill this with your flood icing. And you should have received the download for the gift tag. You can print those off. I usually use cardstock on my printer. But if you don't have that, you could use regular printer paper. I don't think the recipient's going to care. They're just going to be thankful that you thought of them. So here I'm filling this in with my flood. And this cookie is a fast, easy cookie, so it's easy to make a whole bunch of them at once. And then after I allow this to crust over, so while this one's crusting over, I'm working on another one. And then by the time I get done with all the ones that I'm making, the first one is ready to put the yellow on top. So I'm going to use my scribe and just wiggle this around. Give it a little shake, perfectly flat. If there's a little divot, you can touch it with your scribe and it'll sink right in. Now I'm going to let this dry, like I said, till it's really good and crusted over. Next, I'm going to take my yellow piping icing and I'm just going to go across the cookie from the center of those little like bump outs, crossing in the center. Then I'm going to go from the little corners right across, crossing in the center. Next, I'm going to take my yellow flood and I'm just going to start and squeeze, squeeze, squeeze till I have a rounded shape. And that is all you need to do to create that cute little sun. Next, after they're completely dry, I put them in, I think this is a 4x6 cookie bag. I put five of them in there. Put a little cute twist tie. Now, I got this at the dollar store for $1.25. Put a little shred in it. Put the cookie bag in it. I print off the cute tag and attach some dollar store ribbon. That's it. I hope that you all have enjoyed this class and I can't wait to see what you create.